Good evening. Good evening, everyone. We are going to get started very shortly. We're letting everybody come in. We are in meeting mode, not a webinar mode, so you may want to click your mute button. So I want to be really clear. We're talking a lot about functional behavior assessments, knowing that it is a first step down this road that will hopefully continue on to a functional plan that is going to be really helpful in the team thinking and knowing much more about the behavior, using that function again to create opportunities for leverage for supporting that child towards new and different ways of meeting that function through better behavior. Functional behavior assessments are really well founded in research. Good FBAs are very effective in schools, and there's lots of research about that. I want you to note that I did put a qualifier, good FBAs, because we do have occasion, unfortunately, to see some FBAs that are not high quality FBAs and do not do what we're going to talk about tonight. FBAs, this functional behavior assessment process, is really considered the gold standard for thinking about individualized behavior change. And so we really want to respect that the functional behavior assessment is a longstanding, what we would call evidence-based process and practice. So in short, an FBA is a process for identifying the events that reliably predict and maintain that, again, problem behavior. I'm going to remind us that we are going to circle back to this word function many times. Generally, the philosophy that underlies a functional behavior assessment is that those problem behaviors, like most behaviors, keep on occurring because they are meeting a need. And often those functions include escaping or avoiding challenging encounters with a particular person or an activity, or another common function is seeking attention, approval, or some type of reward. So often we're talking about escaping something or gaining something. We also sometimes talk about control, and we sometimes talk about different things that the child will be gaining or escaping. And we're going to talk about all of those, but just on the face of it, common functions, gaining or escaping something. Getting good grades and skipping school are two behaviors that can result in that same function for the child. So we want to recognize that very different behaviors may serve the same function. And we tend to think of some of those behaviors as good behaviors and some of the behaviors as problem behaviors. And so we really want to think about how we want to support the child in meeting the function of that need, that functional communication need, and do it in a way that's going to make those around them happier and, again, be more efficient and effective for that child. Obviously, when we're talking about those two different behaviors, getting good grades or skipping school, for example, the outcomes of those behaviors are very different for the child. But again, same function, perhaps underlying that for adult attention need. We're going to do a quick very overview video that gives, I think, a lot of what I've introduced and a little bit more with a little bit of music and get us going to launch us into this topic. So hopefully, let me know, actually let Natalie know if you're not hearing it. We did test, but you never know.
Hello and welcome to Teachings in Education, the Functional Behavioral Assessment. And let's first begin with some background. Functional behavioral assessments have their place in education, but its roots can be linked back to the sciences. The functional behavioral assessment has its origin in applied behavior analysis, also known as ABA. Functional behavioral assessments are an essential component to positive behavior supports. So what purpose does the functional behavioral assessment serve? Its purpose is to determine the function behind a student's behavior. hence functional behavioral assessment. The goal is to identify the purpose of the behavior. Functional behavioral assessments are implemented to have long-lasting effects. Ultimately, you want to produce a long-term behavior change. Next, the support team. If you really want to make an FBA work, you should create a support team. That way, everyone is invested, and the team can include teachers, paraprofessionals, parents, behaviorists, case managers, etc., and so forth. And let's look at the steps educators take. And the first step begins with simply defining the behavior. It is important that the behavior is something that you can track. So the behavior must be defined in measurable and observable terms. The behavior also should be defined in a way where it can be assessed. Then educators can evaluate the behavior by frequency, duration, and intensity. Next step, collect data. Think of a functional behavioral assessment as a scientific experiment. You're going to need data to make inferences. So gather data to determine the cause and function of the behavior. The next step is to formulate a hypothesis. Again, think of an FBA as a scientific investigation. First, analyze the antecedents, both fast and slow triggers, along with behavioral consequences. Based on that analysis, create a hypothesis. The hypothesis is a statement of what the underlying behavioral causes are. Next up, create a BIP. And what does BIP stand for? Behavior Intervention Plan. Writing an actual behavior intervention plan.
So we're going to stop it there because I said that we're going to focus our time tonight on that functional behavior assessment process. And we welcome a conversation about the BIP at another time. Very important, but our time tonight is just going to allow us to get into the functional behavior assessment. We are in Virginia, and I wanted to at least give a little context specifically for our Virginians in the house tonight. There are three main places in the special education regulations in Virginia. And again, you have access to these slides, Natalie, if you will continue to put in the link to because I noticed we've had some folks come in so that you can access those slides ASAP. I'm not going to get into the specifics of this, but I do want to just recognize there are three main places in the special education regulations for Virginia. That includes the definition of functional behavior assessment. Interestingly, that definition is not in the federal regulations. It is only appears in our state regulations. So that's interesting tidbit to know. So right there is the official definition in Virginia of what an FBA is. Another area where we will see the words functional behavior assessment is in the consent requirements. Again, this is a Virginia specific regulations. States vary a good deal on what those consent regulations are. But you can see that there is a requirement for consent. A parent or caregiver must give must agree and give consent to initiate a functional behavior assessment as an initial or reevaluation, assuming it is not simply a review of existing data. However, when there is a review of that existing data, you do not need the consent. So new data, yes. Existing data, no consent. And that includes when we're talking about FBAs. And then there is some discussion in what's called the general section of the special education regulations. IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. These are the special education regulations that speaks to when an FBA must be conducted. And that is in the case when a child's behavior impedes that child's learning or that of others. And it specifically addresses that circumstance and directs the team that is a non-negotiable, that you must engage in a functional behavior assessment. if that is the case with the child's behavior. And then finally, discipline. There is a lot of language in the regulations, as some of you may know, about discipline of students with disabilities. And a lot of that focuses around short-term removals or consequences for a behavior, and more in more detail, the long-term removals when there is indeed a change of placement considered for a child's significant behavior. Again, within that context, and we're not going to take the time tonight to get into all the nitty-gritty of disciplinary responses to significant behaviors and when that involves long-term removals, but know that that language, the functional behavior assessment, is there in the need for services during that long-term removal. Children with disabilities should not be removed from the access to their specialized services. And during that time, they may need a functional behavior assessment during those long-term removals. And similarly, when the team is determining whether indeed the behavior has a impact or was impacted by the disability, we call that the manifestation determination. Again, lots of information there we can talk about offline if you are at a point where you need to know this information about sort of the disciplinary circumstances. Just know that if there's a manifestation determination to be made, then that IEP team should be conducting a functional behavior assessment if it has not been done, and if it has been done, that they must revisit that. So again, Virginia specific, wanted to let you all know, and Natalie's going to chat this in 2015, there was a pretty lengthy and detailed set of guidelines developed and shared about how to conduct a functional behavior assessment and the resulting behavior intervention plans and the positive behavior interventions and supports that go around that. So that is the current reigning guidance. I will share with you that there is a effort to revise that guidance, and it's pending any moment now that the Virginia Department of Education is going to gift us with that revised guidance. So I do want you to be aware that right now, this is sort of the letter of the law. And it goes through a lot of detail, suggests some forms that we're going to look at briefly. And this is the process generally that we are talking about when we're thinking about functional behavior assessment. First, we want to gather information about the child's, again, problem behavior. We talked earlier about that not being the best term, but that's the term we're going to be using for this evening. And that assessment, that evaluation of the behavior, includes an indirect assessment and a direct assessment, resulting in a hypothesis about the function of that problem behavior. And then in the big picture, that hypothesis guides the development of a functional behavior, guides the development of a behavior intervention plan and objectives around behavior. I want to again be clear that we are just talking about these first 3 steps tonight. What is the result of an FBA? It operationally defines, again, those problem behaviors. And we're going to talk a lot about definition tonight, so you'll hear more about this. It will also describe, again, based on that indirect and direct assessment, the conditions under which that behavior is likely to occur and not likely to occur. So when is it that this child is engaging in this problem behavior, and when are they not engaging? And again, get us closer to what's that potential maintaining consequence, or what we're going to call the function of the behavior, and what reinforces maintain that behavior. Why does the kid keep doing this problem behavior? And that all feeds into our hypothesis that really describes our detective work that gets us at why is that behavior occurring? What is the function of that behavior? Why is it occurring? What happens to contribute to that behavior, and what might be discouraging of that behavior, and what might we want to do then at the next step of a behavior plan to think about other ways to address that function. Data collection is so key, as you saw in that video. Data collection is really the basis of this detective work. Who does this in our schools? Well, this is interesting. The special education regulations don't speak to this. But around here in Northern Virginia, at least, often there's a behavior specialist, some type of employee of the school system who has some expertise in behavior. They may be a board certified behavior analyst, a BCBA, and that's why I list that name, because you will often hear those four letters tossed around and assumption you know what that is. But that is a certification of specialized training and passage of a certificate exam that allows them to have that title. Sometimes they're just teachers who have taken some additional coursework and really dug into the behavior aspect, behavioral principles, and understand the FBA process in great detail. They may or may not be actually at that school full time. In many of our school divisions, they are not full time at that one school where your child may be, but are shared amongst schools. Teachers are absolutely critical to the functional behavior assessment process. Aides or others who are assigned to work with your child. Sometimes those might be a registered behavior technician. Often, many of our schools, they don't actually use that title, but they may be deeply, intimately involved with the child and their behaviors, and certainly are an important source of information. And then clinical staff, school psychologists, school social workers, counselors may also contribute. We hope that family members are absolutely contributing to that information and providing data. And then there may be others. There may be clinical folks outside of the schools, especially when we're talking about our foster, adoptive, and kinship families, where there are many other parties sometimes involved in the care of our child. It's important to recognize that there are some really core values behind a functional behavior assessment. Behavior supports have to be delivered with the utmost regard to the child's dignity. And so I think we think of this, and you can see from the video and what I've said already, it is a scientific process. It is grounded in applied behavior analysis. But at the center of all of this is a child. And so it's really important to remember that we are collecting data and talking about behaviors and making decisions about behaviors where we are fully centered on the fully centered and deeply committed to the dignity and respect of that individual. We're not trying to simply eliminate an undesired behavior, which sometimes is our wish that problem behavior just go away. But again, in the philosophy of functional behavior assessment and behavior analysis, it is important to understand that behavior is serving some type of function. So we want to understand that, again, using our data collection, so that we can then teach and develop alternatives that, again, help that child still meet that function, which is very important to them, but in a way that's going to work more effectively and efficiently. And we want to honor confidentiality, informed consent. We just took a look at what the regulations actually say about consent in schools, and then cultural sensitivity. I want to make a note. We sort of launched right into the special education regulations and references to IDEA, the special education law, and IEPs. I want to make a note that there's nothing that prohibits a school from using a functional behavior assessment with any child. It is not some secret sauce that can only be used with children with IEPs, and IEPs perhaps that even focus on behavior. And I pulled this quote out of a somewhat recent guide, and there's going to be links to all of these resources at the end of our slides, so don't worry, you will be able to access those. This is from the Center on Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, which is a national center, very well respected, does a lot of research and a lot of technical assistance. And I wanted to just read this quote because I thought it was really helpful to ground us a little bit in the big picture of FBAs. So one barrier to effective Tier 3 implementation, that simply means using FBAs for the children who have the highest level of needs and who have not been responsive to other interventions, is the misperception that functional behavior assessment is only for students with IEPs or is a last resort to be used by district level behavior specialists or outside experts to create comprehensive, time-intensive behavior support plans only when the problem behavior has begun to significantly impact educational success. So there is no reason to make this the absolute last resort. And I want to just say that sometimes schools have to triage, and we know that there's lots of needs, and sometimes the functional behavior assessment is sort of the last attempt to address a really significant problem. But again, there is nothing that prohibits this being used in general education, used earlier stage when a behavior is beginning to really creep up as a problem. There are certainly, as we looked at in the regulations, requirements for when a child is having significant, child with a disability who has an IEP is having significant issues, but that is not the only time an FBA can be really helpful. All right, let's get into what it is. This is what we would call a behavior chain. And this behavior chain really is the key to that hypothesis we talked about. And that hypothesis, again, is sort of the result of the FBA. So I want to talk a little bit about this ABC chain, because it provides us a little guidance and a little grounding of once we launch into what we actually do to make this chain a reality. And you see here an A and a B and a C that are hopefully bolded for you. A is the antecedent, B is the behavior, and C is the consequence. I think you heard that referenced in the video. And I want to really keep in mind that these are different aspects of this chain. We're going to actually start momentarily on that link that is the behavior, because as you saw in the video and as we've talked about, defining that behavior is really key to solving this behavior issue. And I don't know if you can see if you're looking at me in the image, I have this little puzzle. I couldn't find one that wasn't Santa, but and you see the image I pasted there on the slide with the letters. It's these. I think this is a better way than saying it's a chain, but to really think of it this kind of puzzle where there's different sides to the blocks. And you can twist those sides to sort of line up a picture. And I think that's what I like to think of when we're thinking about these blocks in this hypothesis chain. We want to understand each of those blocks and then use what we have learned from the data to twist each of those to line up the entire picture to match a little bit more smoothly. So we'll go with that analogy for now, and we'll talk a little bit more as we go through. So to understand that, starting with behavior, I want to just do a very quick introduction of some of the behavioral principles that underlie behavior change. And again, this could be a whole lesson into itself, but I want to at least acknowledge positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and punishment, or sometimes called positive punishment. You could see here in this diagram an antecedent, a behavior, and a consequence for each of these scenarios. And then I want to really draw your attention there to that fourth column about positive reinforcement, punishment, and negative reinforcement. And again, we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of this, but these are the principles on which behaviors continue and have effect for the child. So positive reinforcement, really simply, is a thing that we hopefully are using all the time, where we are looking to increase a behavior, a positive behavior, because we're adding a positive, we're adding a reward or a positive outcome. So in this case, Dejay is given a work assignment. She completes that work quickly. And as a consequence, she gets to play a math game. So that reward, that positive, increases the likelihood that she's going to do her work quickly and accurately. And that's a really simple principle. We hope we're using it all the time. I see somebody doing something good, we praise them, for example, and the likelihood that they're going to continue doing that something good is going to increase. So really simple. The next one, we're also unfortunately pretty familiar with, and that's punishment, or sometimes, like I said, it's called a positive punishment, where you're adding something. And this is when we're trying to decrease something or the behavior decreases. And we often add a negative to decrease the likelihood of that challenging behavior. So in this case, an application of that principle, Dawson's teacher passes out the classwork. He completes the work quickly and accurately, just like today. But guess what? He doesn't get to play the video game. He gets to complete more work. So what happens to the likelihood that Dawson is going to continue to complete that work quickly and accurately? It goes down. So he's a negative has been added, and the result is a decrease in that behavior. And then finally, negative reinforcement. It sounds like it's a negative thing, but it actually can increase. Anything where you see the word reinforcement is you're increasing the likelihood of a behavior. So Sherilyn's teacher passes out the work. Sherilyn makes a rude comment, and Sherilyn has to stand in the hallway, but also gets out of doing the assignment. So that's a principle of negative reinforcement. You have removed a negative to increase the behavior. So we can use these combinations of positive and negative reinforcement and punishment in different ways to hopefully address the behavior. So it was important that we understand that as we move into our description of behavior a little bit more deeply. On the left-hand side of this slide are some statements. And often these are not unfamiliar to us in the words that are used here when we are thinking about the behavior of a child that has whose behavior is presenting problems. So what we want to move is from the blue side to the right-hand side, where there's a better and unbiased, or what we would call objective description of the behavior. So instead of Trish is being aggressive, well, what does that look like? Trish is kicking, she's hitting other students during recess when she does not get her way. So obviously a much more vibrant and clear picture of what is actually happening, and a much more helpful picture than knowing that Trish is aggressive. You can take any of those and see that we can really drill in and describe objectively what that behavior is. In the video, you heard the words intensity, frequency, and duration. Not all of these on the right-hand side get to all of those, but that is a goal. Those are aspects of a behavior that we want to get a better feel for. So as we think about that behavior chain or the puzzle, we want to really dig in on that behavior as the first thing, because understanding that behavior, having an accurate and objective description of that behavior is critical. So we're going to keep moving. Just plugging along here. As we think about those problem behaviors or the challenging behaviors, we have those there on the left. And we also want to make sure that as we think of the behaviors, we want to think about what alternative or replacement behavior we want to strive for. So it's not enough to just identify the challenging behavior, and again, very objectively and descriptively. We want to get to that replacement behavior. What would we like her or him or them to do? Alicia yells out answers during class. Well, that's a problem, and we can measure that. We can take data on that. We can begin to understand why that is happening. We look at the function behind that yelling. But what do we want her to do? We want her to raise her hand to be called on during class. So it's important to keep in mind not only the problem behavior, but our goal. Again, some more examples of really strong definitions. We often hear this term, the child is off task. And so let's drill, for as an example, drill into that. What does off task mean? Well, there we have a definition. And not only do we have the definition, of what that means, engaging in activities and conversations that are not specific to what the teacher is asking them to do, not part of that instructional activity. And we have examples and we have non-examples. So good FBAs include that detailed definition and include examples and non-examples. What does that data collection look like? So we're going to sort of pause on the behavior part of the chain and talk a little bit about what these tools are, and then we're going to go back to the rest of the chain. Data collection, as I mentioned earlier, has to include some direct and some indirect collection methods. The indirect is simply that you're asking somebody else about that behavior. Somebody is being interviewed or surveyed, asked questions about the behavior. And then the direct components, the direct methods, are where a data collector, usually the behavior specialist or teacher, is actually looking directly at the child, observing their behaviors, and collecting that data quantitatively and qualitatively. In addition, there are often record reviews, and we hope from a family lens that there's a family interview as well. But minimally, a good FBA includes that indirect and that direct records. And so, again, pulling from what Virginia has in their 2015 guidance, the FACS checklist, so it's FACS, meaning Functional Assessment Checklist for Teachers, is the FACT, is a form that includes, you can see it there, some questions that are asked of the teacher, or the teacher is asked to fill this out, about some of the challenging routines or challenging problem behaviors and when they are likely to occur and when they're not likely to occur. And it continues on. And I will just draw your attention very briefly to step 6. You see a little bit of setting events, problem behaviors, setting events predictors, which we will call antecedents, problem behaviors, and maintaining consequences. So we're beginning to see that hypothesis chain, that functional behavior chain, take shape. In addition, the 2015 guidance includes a teacher interview form, which again, likely the teacher would either complete that independently, or the behavior specialist would actually sit down with the teacher or teachers and ask these questions directly. And then, as I mentioned, the direct observation, which is our direct assessment, where a outside observer comes and observes the child, begins to take data, descriptive data, as is shown here, and also some quantitative data or numbers. How often are those things happening, to get at that frequency? How long are those behaviors occurring? The duration. This is just one sample form. Again, it is the one that is in that 2015 guidance, to give you a little bit of sense of what that observable data would be asking folks to collect. So again, the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. It's really important that we do get at that frequency of the problem behavior. How long are those behaviors? How intense are the behaviors? If they're bugging the seatmate, is that just like a little flick, you know, of their pencil against somebody else's pencil, or are they like putting hands on the child next to them? Are they causing discomfort to somebody? There's a whole level of intensity scale that we want to capture. When problems are most likely to occur and when they're least likely to occur, what might predict those problem behaviors. And then again, we're asking the teacher and the observer, in this case, to give some thoughts about what might be those maintaining functions. Why is that behavior occurring? So let's jump back into our behavior chain, our problem puzzle. We start with that problem behavior. We get huge amounts of data. We describe it very carefully. And then we think back. Well, now that we understand what behavior we're looking at, what happened right before that? What was what we call the antecedent or preceding behavior? Some common antecedents are frustration, understimulation, particularly for our kiddos who are very bright and may also have some limited attention spans or executive function challenges, being bored, not being engaged enough can be certainly an antecedent that contributes to challenging behaviors, overstimulation, and then the expectations that are in that environment. We're going to move quickly to then our C of the ABC chain, and that's the maintaining consequences. What allows that, what supports that behavior, again, problem behavior, to continue. And again, we return to that idea that sometimes it's something that the child is gaining, and it's sometimes something that the child is avoiding. And it could be something social that they're gaining, it could be something tangible, it could be an activity that they're gaining, or it could be physiological, a sensory need that they are trying to gain or that they are trying to avoid. Just doing a time check. I am really want to make sure we have some time for questions, so I'm going to pick up the pace even more. Again, hopefully you have access to the slides or will be able to do that. This is just another way of really thinking deeply about the functions that might be served by that behavior. What are we gaining? Are we gaining attention? Are we gaining a tangible? Are we getting sensory input? Are we escaping certain feelings, perceptions, events? And I particularly want to get to this as we're talking to our fellow foster, adoptive, and kinship families, that's setting event. And that is the last thing I encourage folks to look at when we're thinking about that behavior chain. So let's talk a little bit about setting events. Setting events are those things that exist in the child's life, those circumstances, those characteristics that help us understand what they're entering this particular behavior change with. And we know that behavior is often predictable. If a child is tired, oops, yeah, nope. If a child is tired, if a child's hungry, those kinds of things can be pretty predictable. So what is a setting event? Essentially, it's the setting, the climate, the context in which the behavior, and the continuing, I'm sorry. Things are popping up. Whoops. All right. Hold on a minute. I apologize. Oh dear. Here we go. Natalie, are you seeing that slide? The setting event slide? Okay, thank you. Clicking didn't do me any good here. So setting event again is the context around that behavior. But prior to the actual event, the actual challenging event. So immediately before the problem behavior could be what we call a proximal antecedent or setting event, or it's something that sort of exists in their world. And that could be what we would call a distal antecedent, or something that happened sort of hours before, days before. And it can include environmental factors. I was just in a webinar, I think with somebody who's in this room tonight, and I heard another professional talk about that as a preset, that distal antecedent as a preset. So whatever term you're using, that's sort of those circumstances that are not that are bringing the child to this circumstance, but exist sort of remotely. And that can include those environmental factors. It can invite social factors. It could be psychological or physiological factors. And sometimes I'm going to introduce the idea of trauma impact. I'm going to just move on past that one, and we're going to actually do a real quick behavior chain, again, with the idea that we're going to move quickly so we have some time for questions. Here's the behavior. So Jason is our little buddy here, and he screams and hits his head when he is teased by his peers, Marge or Allison. When he screams, Marge and Allison move away from him, and they leave Jason alone. This scenario, this behavior is much more likely when Jason is tired. So we would want to sort of dig into this problem behavior by very clearly describing how often the screaming is happening, how often is he hitting his head, how long does it last, how intense is it. We would want to get all of that information captured through our indirect and our direct data collection. Then we would want to identify an antecedent, what happened right before that problem behavior, and what is maintaining that. And I will then we would move to what might be the setting event. Again, we don't know a lot in these 3 sentences, but we have a little clue. So I'm going to ask those of you in the who can grab a moment and chat in what you think that problem behavior might be. So very briefly, what is the problem behavior? Again, not with the detail we would be collecting. But somebody chat in what that problem behavior is. Okay. Oh, you know what? Now I think it's set for only to come to me, but that's okay. I will read what's there. Screaming is a problem behavior. Thank you. And actually, Kelly gave a good answer, but I think we're going to hold off on that because you are actually jumping ahead because you know exactly where I'm headed. Screaming is the act is an observable behavior. Screams and hits the head. Yep, absolutely. That is our problem behavior. And so then we go to our antecedent. What happened right before he screams and hits his head? What is our antecedent? Teasing. Thank you, John. Teasing. Thank you, Susan. Yep. So he's teased. So the antecedent, the immediate antecedent, uh, what we might call the proximal antecedent is the teasing that then leads to the screaming and the hitting. What is the maintaining consequence? What happens after he screams and hits his head? They move away. Thank you, John. Thank you, Susan. Others feel free to chat in. They move away. Right. So that's the maintaining consequence. So we might think, what is maintaining the screaming behavior? It's a reliable that Marge and Allison are going to go away and stop teasing him. And then our setting event. And I think Kelly got at that. Knew exactly where I was going, that he's tired and his body is dysregulated and he's more likely to move into fight or flight when frustrated. Thank you so much, Kelly. That is exactly right. Again, when we see this a lot with our kids who have been in circumstances that raise their traumatic stress level and raise their reactivity, and they're more likely to be dysregulated. Any other setting events that folks would want to chat in, feel free. But you get the idea. Let's see if we're right. Let's see if we're right. Yes, they're tired. The antecedent is he's approached by Marge and Allison, and it's teased, screams and hits his head, and then the maintaining consequences is he avoids the teasing. Okay, so obviously a very social thing, that social avoidance. So I want to just end our time tonight. Thank you for participating. End our time tonight to think a little bit about that foster adoptive and kinship lens. One of the things that I feel really strongly about is that the thinking of that maintaining consequences. Often when I and my students, my new teacher students, often they have to do a functional behavior assessment in my class, and I often just pull from records of kids that they've worked with, and often those consequences focus on the actions of the adults. So John threw his workbook on the floor. The teacher sent him from class. The teacher sent him to the office. He was given a detention. He was, given extra homework, whatever. And that's likely true. That is a consequence of their action. But that focuses only on what the adult is doing to the student. So I think it's really important as we think about this, particularly with that foster adoptive lens, with the idea that many of our kids have had high levels of traumatic stress and are easily dysregulated, is what is maintaining that for the student. So keeping an eye on obviously what the teacher or the adult in that circumstances did, but what then does that mean? What's the implication for the student? Another thing we really need to dig into, I think, and we often overlook or don't give enough credence to, is the impact of trauma as that, what I would say, distal setting event. And then eligibility implications. I have a slide in there. I'm not going to take time to go into it, but as we think about eligibility, particularly under the emotional disability category, to make them eligible for special education, specialized instruction, the role of functional behavior assessment is something we really need to keep in mind. And then it is really our great opportunity to use that ABC chain and the hypothesis puzzle to help with behaviors wherever they're happening. This does not need to be a school-only circumstance. So again, I have a few more slides that I'm not going to take the time to get into because you have them, but I just want to encourage folks as we enter into this process, just as we want all of our practices to be trauma-informed, we want our assessments to also be trauma-informed assessments, and we have some materials on that in our great treasure trove of resources on our website. Under the resources tab, we have some wonderful videos about that intersection of disability and trauma that really talk about what trauma-informed evaluations and trauma-informed IEPs could look like. And then just a reminder that setting events take a wide scope, and those could be things like executive function skills or lagging or lack of skills, so skill deficits that are within the child that really do sort of set up the challenging ABC chain. And I mentioned the emotional disability category. And just a reminder, that ABC chain can be particularly helpful at school and at home. So wherever that child is struggling with behaviors and the people around them are struggling with the behaviors, and helping have an opportunity to help them become more efficient and more effective with new approaches to understand the behavior chain is really essential. And I think Natalie is going to go ahead and chat in the evaluation link in case some of you need to pop out. We do have a few minutes. I had hoped for more, and I apologize. There was just so much information.
Kelly, you do have one question in the chat. Lisa wanted to know, is there a best practice length of time to collect data for an FBA?
Oh, Lisa, that's a good question. So the rule of thumb that I operate and teach my students is you have to have at least 3 distinct and separate observation periods of at least 20 minutes. So I'm talking bare minimal. And this is completely non-contextual with a student. Like just generally. So some students are going to need a lot more, may have very complex behaviors. Another student may have really just one problem behavior, and it may not need to be more than those 3 observations. So I'm not sure that's what you were asking, but in terms of the observation or the direct assessment, that's the rule of thumb that I operate on. It is really important to get those observations across different settings to, again, help us be that detective of when is this behavior likely to occur and when is it not likely to occur. Same with the indirect, the teacher interview, for lack of a better term, getting that information from across different settings, different teachers, different styles, different content. Maybe the setting event is you have a child who has a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and math is a huge challenge for them. And so it's a setting event that he has, or she, or they have a math weakness, and really may sort of be entering into that setting with some real challenges, some real deficits and lagging skills in that area. So that's really important to know. And so it may not be a big surprise that some of those challenging behaviors are more likely to occur in that setting, as just one example. Lisa, if that's not what you're looking for, let me know. But in terms of like how long it should take overall, it is not a quick process, right? Like it's not something that you can say, oh, the team's decided he needs an FBA and we're going to meet next week and have the results. It usually does not happen that fast. Should not happen that fast. Natalie, got anything else? Do encourage you while we are on the slide to follow our social media. We would love to have you join us. We do post things that I hope are very helpful to foster adoptive kinship families and family serving professionals. And we do really appreciate you taking the time to fill out the evaluation. It helps us a great deal. Natalie, if you want to turn off the recording, just in case somebody has a question that they don't feel comfortable